have goals to work towards, right? So my question was, how do you do that if you don't know where you want to go? Because that's kind of where I got stuck on your future authoring program.
Yeah,
because
yeah. Okay, that's a good question. That's a really good question. I think it's echoed to some degree in the structure of the biblical stories, and in this manner. So there's this notion in the Old Testament that morality is following a sequence of prohibitions. There's a bunch of bad things you shouldn't do, and then basically you're good enough. And I think there's wisdom in that. I think that's kind of where children start, right? I mean, I love children and all that, but they're crazy little creatures, and they need to be, civilized. And but partly what you do is you lay prohibitions on them, and mostly what you're trying to do is lay prohibitions on them for the behaviors that, if they manifested, would make their life miserable. So I have another chapter in this book that I'm writing called "Don't Let Your Children Do Anything That Makes You Dislike Them." And the idea there is that your job as a parent is to help your children become the sort of 4-year-olds that adults genuinely smile at when they come into a room, because that makes the entire social environment both truthful and welcoming. And so your job is to make them desirable social beings, and a lot of that is prohibition. Okay, and there's this ethical transformation. It happens to some degree in the tradition of in the prophetic tradition, where there's a spirit that seemed in some sense to rise above the law. But there's a real transformation between the Old Testament and the New Testament, because the Old Testament is prohibition, and the New Testament is, well, here's the good things you do once you're more than merely prohibiting yourself from impulsive sin, let's say. There's a positive good to be accomplished. Well, you might say, well, I don't know what the positive good is. Fair enough, man. So this is why this thing that I've said to people has become this crazy internet meme, but that's to clean up your room, and which is a lot better and more useful than people think. It's a lot harder too, but the first thing you do, I think, and I learned this in part from Solzhenitsyn when he was trying to iron out his soul when he was in the Gulag, because he was trying to figure out how he got there, how he contributed to how he got there. Not Stalin and Hitler, even though they were kind of to blame, but there wasn't much he could do about that. I think what you have to do, and this is part of humility, is you have to look around you within your sphere of influence, like the direct sphere of influence, and fix the things that announce themselves as in need of repair. And those are often small things, and they can be like your room. Put it in order, because the thing is, it isn't exactly so important that your room is in order, although it is. What's important is that you learn how to distinguish between chaos and order, and to be able to act in a manner that produces order. And in most households, there's 100 things that could be done to just make it less hideous and horrible. And so practicing that it's a real useful form of meditation, and it's also, I think it's a divine act, because you're taking chaos. And if you pay attention even to a room, it's so interesting. And I learned, because I've renovated many places now and tried to make them beautiful. And one of the things that I've really learned is that even if you own a structure, unless you've investigated all the nooks and crannies and cleaned them up and put your own imprint on them and made them yours, they're not yours. The mere fact of physical ownership doesn't make them yours. You have to establish a dynamic relationship with the objects before they're actually yours. And I think you can do something as simple as just sit on your bed and think, okay, there's probably like 5 things I could do today so that tomorrow morning is slightly better than this morning was, or at least I'm not falling behind. And those will usually be, it's like having to eat a toad in the morning, right? It's like, it's not going to be something you want to do. There'll be things you're trying to avoid. They're snakes, essentially. But if you ask yourself, like you're asking someone, which I think is a form of prayer, if you ask yourself, instead of telling yourself, what is it that I could do to set things more right today, that I would actually do? It's usually some small thing, because you're not that disciplined, Then you can go do it. And then you put the world together a little more when you do that. And that spreads out. But you also construct yourself into something that's better able to call order forth from chaos. And that makes you just incrementally stronger. And then the next day, you can maybe take on a slightly larger task. And Like, you get the benefit of compound interest if you do that. It's a tremendously powerful technique. And I think if you do that, at some point, instead of just having to fix things up that are not good, you'll start to get a glimmer of the positive things that you could do, you know, the positive things that you could do that would actually constitute a vision. And that's what I would recommend. To think that there's a warrior temperament is a perfectly reasonable thing to think. I mean, there's been whole cultures, many, many cultures, who were devoted to fostering that warrior mentality, you know, where if you weren't like that, you were the outlier. I would say that's probably true of most human cultures across most of time. You know, we've been fortunate enough to live in relatively peaceful times, at least the vast majority of us, so the necessity for that, like right at the edges of actual warfare, is much less than it might be under other historical circumstances. But it's a deep part of many people's nature. And so the question is, what do you do with that, right? And I mean, one alternative potentially is criminal behavior. And you know, the fact that so many people like watching movies about bad guys, you know, is an indication of how attractive that is to people. And I think the reason for that is that, well, Nietzsche observed at one point that most of what people regard as morality is just cowardice. And what he meant by that was that people don't do bad things not because they're good, but because they're afraid to do the bad things. And then when they see people do the bad things, they're actually really deeply attracted by that, because it speaks to part of them that could go beyond the rules. And that's actually a necessary part. It's a really necessary part. Like, you don't make men safe by making them weak. In fact, they're much more dangerous when they're weak, because they'll stab you in the back when they get the chance, or take advantage of you when they get the chance. You make men safe, let's say, by making them strong, and then by making sure that they're disciplined. And so, you know, you've got people like you have got this, let's say, warrior mentality that's a deep part of their temperament, and then you have some choices about what you might do with that. You might try to discipline it and bring it under voluntary control and integrate it into your character, in which then it can make you someone who's stalwart and indomitable, and who will move forward, you know, in the face of tremendous risk. And well, that's the optimal pathway if you have that kind of temperament. I think, like, it's the men that have the most, what would you call it? It's not aggressive exactly, but we'll leave it at that. Aggressive and fearless temperaments that can be the best men. But it's like having a very powerful dog. You better discipline it, because otherwise it's going to be a monster. It's not an accident that the axiomatic Western individual is someone who was unfairly nailed to a cross and tortured. It's like, yes, right, exactly. So what do you do about that? Well, I thought about that for a long time too. It's like, well, you don't get together in a damn mob, because all that does is allow you to be as horrible as you could possibly imagine and suffer from none of the consequences. That's a bad idea. So how about we don't do that? Well, there's a deep idea in the West too. It's like, pick up your damn suffering and bear it, and try to be a good person so you don't make it worse. Well, that's a truth. You know, I read a lot about the terrible things that people have done to each other. You just cannot even imagine it. It's so awful. So you don't want to be someone like that. Now, do you have a reason to be? Yes. You have lots of reasons to be. God, there's reasons to be resentful about your existence. Everyone you know is going to die. You know, you too. And there's going to be a fair bit of pain along the way, and lots of it's going to be unfair. It's like, yeah, no wonder you're resentful. It's like, act it out and see what happens. You make everything you're complaining about infinitely worse. There's this idea that hell is a bottomless pit, and that's because no matter how bad it is, some stupid son of a bitch like you could figure out a way to make it a lot worse. So you think, well, what do you do about that? Well, you accept it. That's what life is like. It's suffering. That's what the religious people have always said. Life is suffering. Yes. Well, who wants to admit that? Well, just think about it. Well, so what do you do in the face of that suffering? try to reduce it. Start with yourself. What good are you? Get yourself together for Christ's sake, so that when your father dies, you're not whining away in a corner, and you can help plan the funeral, and you can stand up solidly so that people can rely on you. That's better. Don't be a damn victim. Of course you're a victim. Jesus, obviously. Put yourself together. And then maybe if you put yourself together, you know how to do that. You know what's wrong with you, if you'll admit it. You know there's a few things you could like polish up a little bit, that you might even be able to manage in your insufficient present condition. And so you might shine yourself up a little bit, and then your eyes will be a little more open, then you can shine yourself up a little bit more, and then maybe you could bring your family together instead of having them be the hateful, spiteful, neurotic, infighting batch that you're like doomed to spend Christmas with. My clients who were genuinely aiming up, because not all of them were, but most of them were, the ones who were genuinely aiming up made rapid progress. And it was extremely engaging and entertaining to work with them on that. You know, we'd set goals. I want to triple my salary in 3 years. That was fun. It's like, okay, that sounds like a war. How might you do that? And it was extraordinarily entertaining to plot that out, to strategize about it like it was a full-fledged war, you know, but a war for something positive, and a war that would benefit the person who won and also the people around them. And that's well within your grasp. There's any number of things that are right in front of you that you could radically improve with the right vision, and that would result in radical improvement, and not just for you, but for everybody around you. That's just right there in front of everyone. And it's particularly true if what's around you is pretty dismal, because if what's around you is pretty dismal, there's just no shortage of opportunity for improvement. Might be difficult, but man, there's lots of possibilities sitting there as well. So aim up, get a vision, man, and pursue it. And the more of us that do that, the better things are going to be.